Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Government Coins. This is episode 7. We have really been rocking and rolling throughout this podcast. Today, it's myself, Shakia. Many of you know who I am. If you've been following this podcast, if not, again, I'm Shakia. I'm one of the 3 co-hosts of this podcast. And today we brought on an amazing guest from USAID. So you can learn more about how to do business with USAID and just government contracting in general. And our guest today is Matthew Johnson. Matt, would you mind telling people who you are?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on. My name is Matt Johnson. I am a Communications Director in USAID's Office of Acquisition Assistance. So we have the same office that manages government contracts as well as grants and cooperative agreements. So I'm the Communications Director for that office, but I also serve as USAID's Industry Liaison. Really part of my job or my team's job is to be a front door, open door to USAID for any organization that is interested in partnering or doing business with us around the world.
Okay, and then, so could you explain your role again to us just a little bit?
Yeah, so within every federal agency, this has happened a couple of years ago, there's what's called an industry liaison. If you don't know who they are, you should definitely reach out to them or just do a Google search, industry liaison in any US government agency, you'll find one of us. But our jobs are kind of as like a front door to the agency for any businesses that are interested in working with a federal government agency. So for me, my team, we basically answer all sorts of inquiries, questions for anyone that wants to understand sort of how do you do business with USAID? How do you work with us? How do you get funding? So we do a lot of things. We actually manage a website called workwithusaid.org that sort of acts as a front door portal to our team. We do like one-on-one kind of consultations with businesses, try to help them match up and explain sort of what they do to what USAID does, as well as host a number of different events, both digitally and in person during non-COVID times, really to try and connect businesses and organizations to USAID and international development and the work that we do.
Wow. So that's pretty awesome. Just before we hop in, our guests, our hosts were able to hop onto this call as well. So Matt, Chrisley and Hamza, would you mind introducing yourselves to Mr. Matt Johnson?
Yes, good afternoon, Matt Johnson. My name is Hamza Sabri. I am one of the co-hosts of Government Coins, and also I am the founder and CEO of Global Connects.
Hello. Hi, Matt. My name is Chrisley. I am the founder of the Black Bunker. Essentially, it's a program that we establish in different cities and counties in order to help MWBEs understand the intricacies of doing business with the government. Obviously, it is a tongue twister. And also, I'm the founder of Chrisley G Consulting. We're a human capital firm. We focus on supporting government agencies doing that conversion from the paper and updating to a more sophisticated HRIS system and all things employee relations.
Awesome. Thank you. Great to meet you all.
So just before we hop to the next question, one of the things that we briefly discussed before the call was how AID's actual mission isn't just a part of like the US, it's global, it's it's not just nationwide, it's global. Definitely love to hear a little bit more about like the mission of AID and how that supports not only the US, but other countries as well.
Yeah, that's great. So I feel like USAID is a little bit different. I've worked at a bunch of different agencies. I worked at EPA, Department of Transportation, the White House, USAID. I feel like we're unique in that like we have a very small office in Washington, DC, but then we have offices in 90 countries around the world. So the bulk of our staff actually aren't even in the United States at all. Most of them are actually overseas working in developing countries around the world. And really the mission of USAID is to both promote and demonstrate sort of like the democratic values of the United States by really helping to lift people up out of poverty, trying to help countries, help individuals move out of poverty to really kind of own their own development or own kind of their own country, similar to what you see sort of in the United States or other places. And so at USAID, we're one of the U.S. foreign policy agencies. We work closely with the Department of Defense and Department of State. And so our work is generally separate from political and military assistance, but it certainly plays a role in the work that we do around the world. And so, really at the heart of it, our work is to try and build a healthier, safer, and more prosperous people around the world at USAID. And so it's a really cool mission and a unique mission than most other federal agencies. And like I said, probably 2/3 of our staff actually aren't even Americans. They're people that actually live and are working for us in the countries that they live in or based out of, which is really cool. So we have a very unique mission in how we operate.
So what would you say are some of the top areas where, because I want to just really get the audience to understand USAID's spending habits, because that's really going to help them navigate the space on how they want to do business, right? So what would you think are the top areas where USAID spends, although you guys are international, right? But where can our audience kind of focus their time and attention?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to kind of slice and dice how we spend our funding. If you look at it from like a really big picture, probably around 20 to 30% of our funding goes to contracts every year. So if you're looking, if you're a business, a for-profit business, goes to contracts. Around 40% goes to grants. So typically working with like non-governmental organizations, oftentimes some of the larger like organizations like World Health Organizations or UN organizations. And then about 1/3 of our funding goes to what we call cooperative agreements. If you're not familiar with a cooperative agreement, it's kind of like you take a grant and a contract and merge them together. It sort of has elements of both in it. And so that's sort of looking at a high level, sort of our funding. And oftentimes, depending on the type of organization, how an organization's made up will depend on the type of funding they go after. Although that doesn't necessarily preclude an organization from working with us in one way or the other. Looking at it much on kind of a different lens within like different sectors or areas or ways that we work, around 40% of our funding is spent in global health programs. And so for USAID, we are leading the US government's response of actually delivering vaccines around the world to developing countries. We do a large amount of work in fighting HIV/AIDS, malaria, and a lot of other infectious diseases. And so when you hear about Ebola or other kind of health-related crises that are happening around the world, USAID is taking a lead there. That represents probably around 40% of our funding on an annual basis, give or take, depending on what's happening. It's certainly been a little bit more the last couple of years with COVID. The second big element is around humanitarian assistance. And so if you think of FEMA in the United States, we're sort of like the FEMA of anything overseas. So any time a disaster happens overseas, whether it's political, natural disaster, whatever, we are there responding on behalf of the US government. So we have teams of people kind of around the world managing programs and managing kind of humanitarian assistance work. When you look at sort of other areas of the agency, about 10% of our funding kind of goes to sort of program management type work of how do we monitor and evaluate programs. But really, at USAID, we work in every different type of sector you can imagine. So we do economic growth programs, we do agricultural programs, we do climate change programs, we do a little bit of everything really around the world. And so our funding is pretty, spread out across a whole host of different sectors. And one of the cool things with that, I think, no matter what kind of organization you are, no matter what you do, there's probably a space for you within the agency in how you want to work with us.
Hamza,
you're on mute.
I'm on. Okay.
Go. Now
I'm just joking. I'm on mute.
Okay. I was like, now we just don't hear. Oh, go.
I apologize about that, Matt. But are there any type of specialized programs for small businesses, small minority-owned businesses?
Yes, that's a great question. So we have an amazing Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization, or OSW office, or Small Business Office, that when we're physically in the office sits right across the hall from us, that our team works closely with kind of from the industry liaison. If you are a U.S. small business, they're really one of the best places to get connected to the agency. as a whole. They have a number of different small business specialists that focus on different aspects or elements of USAID. But one of the things specifically for U.S. small businesses is every one of our offices, both in D.C. as well as our offices overseas, or what we call missions is what our offices overseas are called, actually have small business targets that are set for each of them on an annual basis that we're kind of tracking to see what we're doing with small businesses. The other cool thing about our small business office is that for every contract that's coming out of Washington, D.C., kind of out of our headquarters office, our small business actually reviews it ahead of time and helps make a determination whether something is going to be set aside for a small business or it should go to a large business or others. And so one of their big parts of their work is doing market research to identify who are some of the capable small businesses that we as an agency can work with. And it's really helpful to work with them because they know all of the upcoming procurements before you even get public information about it. They know about it and they're helping to kind of recommend small businesses to do work there, which is really helpful. And so, you can always reach out to our small business office. Their email address is osdabu1@usaid.gov. Or you can reach out to me and my team at Industry Liaison at usaid.gov, and we're happy to connect you to that team. The other thing I'll just note, we as an agency, we have a goal every year for the amount of funding we have to spend on U.S. small businesses. I think last year it was around 14% of our contract dollars were spent with U.S. small businesses.
How much was the contract dollars?
Just contract dollars. Typically, grants and cooperative agreements, we don't have many small businesses working with us because there's no profit involved in working with us under those kind of different mechanisms. But the Small Business Act kind of specifically applies to that. So we generally exceed our small business goals as an agency. However, when you start breaking it down to some of the socioeconomic factors, particularly around like veteran-owned small businesses, we often have a difficult time meeting those goals of trying to find those organizations. So if you're listening and you're a veteran-owned small business, let us know who you are. Let us know that you're out there, because those are definitely one of the groups that we're most specifically focused on targeting, as well as what. Yeah, go ahead.
Why is it difficult for you to meet with the veteran-owned business classification?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I think there's a host of reasons why. I think that oftentimes it's trying to find veteran-owned small businesses that kind of work in the sectors or spaces that we have funding opportunities in. If you look at kind of our programs as a whole, a lot of small business opportunities are around like monitoring and evaluation of programs or activities in other sectors. And so they're just, I would say generally within international development, there seems to be like a pool of small businesses that kind of do a certain type of work. And for whatever reason, there hasn't been a large growth of veteran-owned small businesses in that area. So we actually do a couple times a year, like a specific veteran-owned small business outreach event and others to try and identify and find veteran-owned businesses.
And okay. I think it wouldn't, I would beat myself up if I didn't do a selfish plug, but did you know that Takia is a veteran? And so I'm always going to make sure that we just put that out there. Thus, I think that would be a great connection. So when you do have your, outreach events, that'd be great to have Shakia present since she is a vet.
Yeah, absolutely. She was telling me that right before we started. So
yes.
We'd love it. Yeah, I'd love to get her engaged.
I got one last question because my brain is going off. And I know we got a lot of viewers right here that's new to government contracting, small businesses. Mm-hmm. How would a small business be able to engage or build rapport with a type of agency like you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of different ways. I have a blog that's going to be going up on our website called on workwithusaid.org. It's like 7 ways to actually introduce yourself to USAID, with a number 8 bonus if you're a small business to kind of introduce yourselves to us. So there are a lot of different ways. So one of which is we just launched this new website in November of last year called workwithusaid.org. That in that we actually have a partner directory. We're trying to identify organizations around the world that are potentially interested in working with us. It's easy to know who you're working with. It's sometimes harder to find new businesses. So we set up this directory to kind of identify who some of these small businesses are. You can always reach out to me and my team at Industry Liaison at usaid.gov. We'd love to meet with new businesses, connect you to the agency as a whole. A couple other things, we do a lot of work on social media within our office and team. So we manage work with USAID LinkedIn page. We have a work with USAID Twitter handle and other stuff. And on those pages, we actually post daily funding opportunities, daily requests for information, all sorts of ways to actually get engaged with the agency. So that's really one of the best ways to get information kind of happening on a daily basis. And then the final thing I'll say, because I could talk for hours probably on how to get connected. At USAID, one of the things that we're continually trying to do is do, broadly speaking, what we call co-creation. But it's really kind of this concept or idea of how do we get new businesses, how do we get ideas from people sort of outside of USAID into the programs that we're executing on. So we do a lot with that. We do a lot of requests for information, or we do a lot of industry days. And a key part of, I think, how we identify and engage with new businesses is a part of people that respond to those requests for information. We do a lot of draft scopes of work or other things to get feedback or input, but also allow organizations to introduce themselves to us. Just last year, for example, I think 30% of all new contracts that came out of USAID included some level of co-creation, like an industry day, request for information like that. And we're kind of continually pushing to try and do more and more of that, as creating an avenue, a vehicle around very specific funding opportunities to connect with new businesses.
So Matt, you're saying that responding back to RFIs or requests for information is a key thing into doing business with the agency. Yeah,
I mean, I think particularly for small businesses, one of one of the key things that our small business office says, they get kind of upset because we push for small businesses to do programs or activities, and what happens oftentimes is said, all right, well, we'll issue an RFI or request for information, see who responds back to it. And then no small businesses reply back to it. And so our small business office comes back and says, why didn't anyone respond back to it? We keep saying that you can do the work, but no small businesses responded back to it. So then our technical office are saying, well, now we have to go with a large business because obviously there's no small businesses who can do this work. So it's really critical for small businesses to respond back to it. I know it takes time and there's a cost associated with it for doing it, but it really is a critical piece of input or feedback that you can do to introduce yourself to USAID.
Awesome. I hope the viewer just took down that gem, because he just gave you the actual entryway into doing business with the agency, and that's responding back to the RFIs, because not a lot of participation comes back from the RFIs because it's not a guarantee of getting any work. Mm-hmm. It makes all time and energy so you can do the research and due diligence as a small business to report back that request for information. But that's a way of advertising, marketing to the agency of your small business, correct?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think, for USAID, we work in 110 countries. So we have 110 countries of potential partners to work with. So a big part of our work is to try and do market research to identify who are capable organizations that are out there. There's always an advantage for us to work with U.S. small businesses. Just the way procurement laws are set up, it makes it a whole lot easier to work with them. And so we issue these RFIs or host these industry days really to try and do that market research, identify who is out there to do work. And so those often determine and dictate kind of what our procurement approach will be, whether it's a small business, a large business, a foreign business, or others. So it's so important for small businesses to respond back to that.
Awesome.
I wanted to ask a quick question just before Chrisley asks her next question. Sorry about that, Chrisley. But usually if I'm on sam.gov and I see an opportunity for USAID, it's usually more of a job posting how would that work? Look, shameless plug here, but do you work with human capital firms? Can a human capital firm respond to that opportunity, or would it be more of, it has to be that potential candidate?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we have a special hiring authority at USAID called Personal Services Contractors, or PSCs. They're like individual contractors. So it's not a company, it's an individual. One of my roles at USAID was as a personal services contractor. I think I helped to run communications for our Asia and Middle East office at the time, but it's like a special hiring category that we have at USAID. So if you go to sam.gov right now, probably every other opportunity is actually like a personal services contractor. So that is like an individual contract that somebody has with USAID. It's not necessarily something we're looking for like a firm to work with us on.
Got it. Okay.
No, I wanted to ask this question, Matt, because, we've probably, if you haven't seen any episodes in the past, like one of them, for example, we talked about NASA and the importance of responding to RFIs. So if you had to give a piece of advice to a small business that had to respond to a RFI, what do you think, for those that did respond in your past, in your career, what do you think are some of the exceptional things that you've seen that you're like, small businesses should instill this in their RFI or their source of sought response? And what are some of the mistakes that you think they should, steer clear from?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we get a lot of people that send us like their capability statements and say, I can do everything. And we're like, okay, great. Like, nobody can do everything. I mean, even the large firms can't do everything, and so I think what we're often looking for is like, with a particular RFI, we have a very specific goals or targets that we're trying to achieve. And so I think probably the two key things that we're looking for, like, one, do you have experience kind of in the past, or like past performance as an organization, or even individuals that you have on your team that have done this type of work before in the past? I think a challenge of breaking into USAID is that, most of what we do isn't in the United States. So we're often looking for people that have experience in working in challenging contexts or challenging environments that aren't, necessarily US based. And so I think it's demonstrating that kind of technical experience or expertise. And then I think demonstrating that you have the people in place to really execute on it. I think for USAID, since we're foreign assistance, all of our funding goes outside of the United States. There's a intense level of scrutiny of how we spend our money, what our money looks like, what the risks are associated with it if our program fails. And so I think for us, we're always looking for organizations that can really demonstrate, like, hey, I'm not just telling you generally I can do it. I'm telling you concrete examples of how I've done it in the past and how I can guarantee to do it in the future, how I have a team or people in place to execute on it. To the certain extent possible, give us a guarantee that you can actually achieve the results of what we're looking to do.
I think that's a great segue into like the next question that I wanted to ask you, because most of the funding you said is spent outside of the United States. Exactly how much is USAID's current budget? And then we already talked about some of the top industries, but how do I find a forecast for where the money is going to be spent?
Yeah, so we have, generally speaking, around, it's varied from year to year, but around $17 to about $22 billion a year that we have in programs. And these are like actual activities that we're implementing overseas, kind of outside of like our operating expenses as an agency. So I would say around 20 billion. Last year was a bit of an anomaly. I think we were at like $26 billion, but we purchased like $5 billion worth of COVID vaccines, which is not something obviously we're normally doing. And so that's kind of, generally speaking, I know that sounds like a lot of money, but then when you break it down to actually operating in like 100 countries, it's not that much oftentimes to go around. Sometimes we're operating countries with a handful of millions of dollars to work. So that's a little bit about our budget. One of the things that we're really proud of at USAID, we have a live feed business forecast. So if you go to usaid.gov/business-forecast, we have a forecast that actually is updated daily, pulling from our internal planning system. So we have an internal planning system called the Acquisition Systems Planning Tool that all of our contracting officers, agreement officers, as well as our technical officers actually manage all of their individual programs or activities. But if you go to the business forecast, it is updated daily, kind of, like I said, pulling from our internal system. We'll have every upcoming funding opportunity for the next year around the agency. When I looked at it yesterday or 2 days ago, I think there's like 240 or 270 different upcoming funding opportunities within the agency. And it's really cool because, one, it has a host of information. You can see a date when the information was last updated. So you can actually sort and search by when it was updated. You can search by the amount of funding, sectors, countries that we as an agency are working in, as well as a number of different socioeconomic factors. So it's really an amazing tool for you to do market research at USAID. And we have an internal policy that basically says anything before it ever is posted on SAM.gov or grants.gov has to go in the business forecast. So it is really one of the best tools to get information and research. The other thing, I'll just give another plug. If you're looking at our business forecast page right now, we actually also do a quarterly outreach event where we ask people to send us questions on anything about any upcoming funding opportunities within the agency. So our next business forecast call is on March 22nd at 9 a.m. Eastern time. My team just finished actually going through all the questions. The questions were due to us by this past Monday, but I think we received probably close to 1,000 questions on upcoming funding opportunities within the agency that we then task out to all of our contracting and agreement officers around the world to answer questions about things in the agency. So if you're interested, you can register on our webpage. If you go to usaid.gov/business-forecast, you can register for the upcoming event. That same day of the event, we'll publish an Excel spreadsheet that'll have answers to all of the questions that we received related to the business forecast. And so we try to do this quarterly, not only to give you kind of like, here's our updated business forecast or what's updated every daily, but really kind of dive deeper into like additional questions. Just going through all the questions that we received over the last couple of days. There's a host of questions about, is this opportunity going to be set aside for small businesses? Or, I'm a small business, I can do this work. How can I let you know who I am to kind of help change some of your procurement strategy or procurement approach? So it really is an amazing tool to do market research and to connect and engage with USAID.
I love the fact that you mentioned the question, is this an opportunity that can be set aside for a small business? Mm-hmm. And this kind of also feeds back into that RFI response aspect of it. If you get in before it hits sam.gov or before it hits the streets, right? That's what we say. Before it hits the streets, it gives you the opportunity to go ahead and market your business and possibly assist with, hey, this could be set aside. Is that, correct in saying something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's absolutely true. So one of the things you'll see on the business forecast, there's a point of contact that's listed for every funding opportunity as well. And one of the ways that we encourage people to connect with us or introduce themselves is, email the point of contact that's on our business forecast, or try and connect with the point of contact on our business forecast and introduce yourself to them. Let them know who you are, what you're doing, and why you think you can actually help USAID meet that particular requirement.
Love it.
So responding back to the RFI, potentially can turn into a sole source contract for that small business?
If you have like the right socioeconomic factors, yeah, that definitely can happen.
I think that could be the veteran.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm like, Matt, you're the first person. So let's just preface this by saying, between NASA, U.S. Department of Transportation, the port, you're the first one to come on this podcast and say, if the socioeconomic matches. And so we would like to say, if anybody's paying attention, we usually say, don't lead with your socioeconomic. But in this instance, we're going to start to lead with our socioeconomic, right? So, yeah. But we also want to make sure, we can start the conversation, talk about our socioeconomic status and where our businesses are at. But as much as we want to make sure that we're stressing the value that we can add to the needs that USAID might need, right? So once you start with, hey, we're a women-owned small business or we're a veteran-owned small business, we then followed up with specifically paying attention to the forecast. This is how we can meet your needs. This is how we've done it in the past. Let us show you some examples. That they're looking for a holistic view of what value you can contribute to the agency. So I think that's, we always say, like, don't start with your socioeconomic. In this instance, we're also going to pay attention to that agency. Okay, everyone?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've had a lot of conversations with members of Congress and others, people on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, that are specifically looking at, the diversity of USAID's partners and the partner base of who we work with. And, looking at diversity from a host of different angles. And I think one is particularly working with minority institutions, minority organizations. How do we increase their representation within USAID and the work that we're doing? And so that's something that we're always particularly interested in, or kind of like looking, slicing and dicing. Is probably every couple of months we have a question from someone on the Hill asking for information from us about that. But it's something that we're always looking at, really trying to identify small businesses or businesses that can work with us. So, yeah.
And this is just a quick question. So working with small businesses and then also working in so many different countries, how do you engage local communities in those different areas? And I know this is like completely off topic of what we were talking about, but how do you engage with businesses in those local communities? Is that a part of it? Or do we focus primarily on working with US based businesses?
Yeah, so each year we work with around 3,500 organizations. So 3,500 organizations on kind of an annual basis. And those organizations are really everywhere, all around the world. They're located in the countries that we're working in. They're in Europe, they're in the US, they're really all over the place. So we engage with those businesses, organizations in a host of different ways. So first and foremost, we have a team that's in the ground in every country that we work in called a mission. It's often co-located with an embassy, but we have a team of people that are on the ground that are working with local government leaders, local civil society organizations, small businesses, et cetera, to do work. One of the key things I would just note, I think for everybody on here, if you're interested in working with USAID, we have what we call a country development cooperation strategy. The acronym is CDCS, but it outlines all of our goals and objectives for everything that we're doing in all of the countries that we're working in. So if you're interested in working with USAID in Kenya or East Timor or El Salvador, our country development cooperation strategies are really sort of like our agreement within the agency with local governments and other officials to sort of like what activities and programs are we going to execute within the agency in the countries that we're working in. And so as a part of the development of those CDCS documents, there's a lot of engagement that takes place with local organizations. The other piece of it, we talk about the co-creation idea, what I talked about doing industry days and others. We try and do a lot of different industry days or engagement with local organizations to really kind of get them into designing the programs or activities of what we're doing. My team as well, we actually have somebody from our Guatemala office that's actually working with us right now, translating a lot of the materials that we produce into Spanish. And I think in a week and a half, she's going to be doing a webinar with us with countries or organizations that are based in Latin America that speak primarily Spanish to kind of explain to them how to work with USAID, explain some of the resources and connect them to the agency. Generally speaking, as an agency, we have a very large sort of what we're calling a localization goal, a push to work more and more with local organizations. Our administrator a couple months ago set a goal that within the next 4 years, she wants 25% of our funding to actually go directly to local organizations of what we're working with. So the launch of our platform, workwithusaid.org, was a big part of that push to try and help identify who some of those local organizations are. And just one other plug for our website. If you go to that website, workwithusaid.org, after you register your organization, we have on there something called a pre-engagement assessment or a readiness assessment. It's a simple, like 48 question assessment that actually helps organizations determine kind of what is their capability or capacity to work with USAID today. And so after you take this assessment, you get a score or rating on areas like human resources, program management, et cetera. And then, depending on your score, you then get recommended trainings, resources, and a library of things that you can do to kind of increase your readiness to work with USAID. So if you're like totally new to USAID, don't know anything about us at all, you can actually go onto that assessment and then get really customized and tailored resources for you and your organization to be in a better position to compete for funding with USAID.
Oh, that's nice. That's really nice.
That's exceptional. So I think one being that, we're so used to seeing government agencies be a little lag on the technology that we're using. And we have not seen what's called I'm looking at it right now. It's a pre-engagement assessment. This is the first time I've ever seen a pre-engagement assessment. So kudos to USAID and your movement towards making sure that not only US-based businesses are involved, but you're also making sure that international businesses are involved to go towards that 25% mark. That's big. And I love the fact that with the assessment, you're really going to identify the gap, like what's missing and how can we support you in getting into business. Matt, I feel like, if you push for the software, you should probably reach out to other agencies and get promoted to different agencies, Matt.
Yeah, there's a monthly industry liaison meeting where we present all of these tools and resources. So I know I've presented on our business forecast a number of times, as well as our pre-engagement assessment. I think we probably met with 14 or 15 different agencies about our business forecast, kind of talking how we've set that process up, and we've started doing a round of briefs around the pre-engagement assessment and our work with USAID.org platform as well, because we think one of the great things about USAID, we're a small organization, so we can be a little bit more nimble. It's one of the benefits of being small, that you can kind of create these things and roll it out. So yeah, but it's great. I think I totally agree. It's the type of resources I think we want to see with other federal agencies as well.
So although we always talk about government contracting on this platform because we focus on for-profit, there are small businesses that really aren't aware of the grant opportunities. So what are there grant opportunities available for small businesses as well?
Yeah, so there are a lot of grant opportunities. 2/3 of our funding goes towards assistance, which is grants and cooperative agreements. The structure of how a grant or cooperative agreement is set up is a little bit different from a contract. But oftentimes there's more flexibility in a grant or cooperative agreement versus a contract. And so, we encourage small businesses and businesses to look at grant or cooperative agreement opportunities, because we also think it's a great way to partner with us. A couple of the key distinctions under a grant or cooperative agreement: an organization can't receive profit for the work that they're doing. So oftentimes there's charging sort of an indirect cost against the US government to do some of the work. But I would encourage, any small business or anyone that's interested in kind of entering into the USAID space to look at grants or cooperative agreements. All of them are posted on grants.gov. You'll see them mixed in with our business forecast as well, whether it's a grant, cooperative agreement, or a contract. The other critical thing I would note is that we have a large portion of like sub opportunities to grants. So we have a large number of like grants under contracts or contracts that get issued under grants as well. And so we have a host of like large organizations that are working with us that still need a lot of like goods and services that a lot of small businesses deliver on. And so we encourage them to reach out and connect with our larger partners as well, as a great way of kind of getting your foot in the door. Maybe it's not directly with USAID, maybe it's through a subcontract or sub-partnership agreement, but it really is an interesting way to get your foot in the door. And I think if you're new to working in the international space, it's really one of the best ways to get some of that experience and kind of get to know how it works and how we operate.
Now, is there anywhere we can find the list of prime contractors who have subcontracting plans in place?
So we don't have those. Those are not like publicly available. I don't even know where they are, to be honest. We do. Our office does release an annual report. I'll pull the link up and share it so it can be shared in the chat box with everybody. We have an annual report that our office does. It actually gives a breakdown of all of our spending, how it's done, or how our spending is done, but it includes in there a list of the top 15 contracting partners, as well as the top 15 assistance partners that we work with in the agency. So those 30 or so organizations probably represent 60 to 70% of USAID's funding right there within programs. So that's kind of the best place that we have right now. We are working at, as a part of our like future development of work with USAID.org, we're exploring the possibility of trying to create almost like a subcontracting or sub-partnership like board where organizations can come in and post and highlight different sub-partnership opportunities to organizations around the world, but we don't have that set up yet.
Well, I will contact you about that because we have that, but
yeah.
I'll go ahead and ask her later question.
I think, Hamza, were you about to ask a question?
No, I wasn't. I was just right down here taking down notes.
So you know what? I think you mentioned it earlier, but are there any small business outreach events or training that you want to reiterate and talk about? I know you received 1,000 responses or questions, but what else would you like to tell this audience about USAID?
Yeah, that's great. So I would say a couple of things. So one, as I mentioned, we have offices in 100 countries. So it'll sometimes feel like you're working with 100 different offices at USAID. Every country we work in has a different operating environment. That's really one of the roles of my team and even our small business office, is to make it a little bit easier so you don't feel like you have to work with 100 different organizations. If you're a small business, We have an annual small business conference that we have. I'll see if I can find a link to it. We have on our small business office's website. They have a host of different events that they do, both around like for women-owned small businesses, veteran-owned small businesses, minority-owned small businesses. I'll drop the link into the chat box to be shared with everybody. But on there, you can actually find a host of different opportunities. We are working on workwithusaid.org, actually releasing an events calendar as well. We'll be pulling from what our small business office is doing, what all of our offices overseas are doing, kind of in one centralized calendar to try and highlight and publicize different ways to get engaged within the agency. So I think that's, one of the ways to find out about events. I think, probably how a lot of other federal agencies are, we just have so many different offices. Oftentimes communications are very decentralized. So what we try and do is through our like social media platforms, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, is we kind of we take the time and energy every day to kind of scour all of the different ways that we know the agency is pushing out information to try and highlight and share it with folks. So I'll drop a link into the thing chat box for our LinkedIn group, our Work with USAID LinkedIn group. I would say that's one of our main spaces where we try and have dialogues and conversations and discussions about pushing out resources that are helpful to you, as well as where we identify different events and activities that are taking place within the agency. The one other thing I'll just note, I think within contracting in general, I don't know if you're familiar with category management and some of the goals coming out of category management. That certainly is something that is changing the dynamic and scope of a little bit of how we work with small businesses, just because of this push towards working with, the best in class contracts, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 contracts. And so the main contracting vehicle we use is the OASIS GSA schedule. OASIS seems to be like the one place where there are a lot of capabilities, organizations, and even sort of services that we as an organization are looking to buy. So, getting down into the weeds a little bit more, if you're a small business that's interested in working with USAID, OASIS is really one of the best tools to be on. OASIS, I think, is up for, I don't know what the right GSA terms are, but a recompete in the next year and a half. There's a next generation of it, which I don't recall the name of it right now, but I would definitely pay attention to the OASIS tool and the next iteration or generation of it, because that's really one of the key places where we're oftentimes looking for small businesses or looking for services. Because if we can get something off a GSA schedule that's, a women-owned, veteran-owned small business, we meet our category management goals, we meet our small business high-level goals, we meet our women-owned small business goals and our veteran-owned small business goals. So it's sort of like, we can meet a whole bunch of goals at one time, oftentimes by using some of these broader GSA schedules or category management vehicles.
That's a good one. Because that GSA schedule, it's been a process it's been a conversation that a lot of people have talked about. It's just a matter of, we tell, business owners, you have to know your pricing. You have to, have some past performance to actually even apply for a GSA schedule. And it is a long behind process. But it's really good to see and hear that you have outlined in terms of, which schedules and how, the process is going. It's really giving an idea of where, agencies are looking for small businesses initially, especially realizing that we want to make the process easy for agencies to buy from us. And one of the ways of doing that is through a GSA schedule and, of course, leveraging our certifications. So thank you for that, Matt.
Yeah, and I think, yes. I think one of our big goals at the agency is try and make it easier to work with USAID. Similar to make it easier to work with you all, it's one of our big goals and objectives to really try and simplify the process to working with us. So that's a big part of what my team and our office is doing to try and find ways of, one, explaining the process, but then how do we simplify the process as a whole? So I definitely understand that and appreciate that.
Sorry, Matt, I have one more question.
Yeah.
So, I've already skimmed through the entire pre-engagement assessment, click through tabs. And so my burning question is, when we talk about program and compliance, HR, program management, budget, and finance, these are obviously pillars in a business that there are usually gaps for small businesses. So when you create the assessment, I'm assuming there's an end goal to help support these small businesses. What does that look like for a business? Let's say they answer, we don't have a sufficient staff or the essential operations on the HR part. What is USAID's goal in helping support that?
Yeah, so I think oftentimes, so this is, there's sort of like, this is sort of the pre-engagement part, kind of pre-procurement. If you, go through the procurement process, we get to the point we want to work with you and there's identified gaps. Oftentimes what will happen is it'll kind of dictate or determine within your contract or award that you have with USAID kind of requirements to set up specific materials or safeguards or practices in place within your organization. Mm-hmm. We have, within the pre-engagement assessment, once you take the pre-engagement assessment, it'll link you to a host of resources that are in the library on that website that really try and spell out the specific requirements of what we're looking for from a USAID or US government perspective within those areas. And so oftentimes, it doesn't preclude you from working with USAID. It just may mean that there may be some stipulations or things written in your contract, or may be a different type of contract that we award to you that are requiring you to kind of build some of those capacities in the organization internally.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Shakia, if you want to, are there any questions in the Zoom online?
I actually have been listening and I didn't get a chance to ask people if they had questions. But we are also almost over anyway, so we can wrap it up.
Okay, well, Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, we've learned so much about USAID. This is the first time we've really had an agency that focused on the international side of it. So you can obviously, we encourage you to come back as we renew our seasons. And thank you for coming to an audience that essentially is diverse and caters to, the minority community. That's big for USAID to really take that time. And we appreciate that immensely. And so once again, everyone, to our viewers out there, you've heard what Matt has said. We've talked about RFIs all day long. I don't know how much we can stress RFIs. And then Matt has opened the floodgates of heaven when it comes down to veteran-owned small businesses. If you're a veteran-owned small business and you think that your business can essentially add value to USAID, this is your blatant opportunity, but also please respond with value. I am Chris Lee, one of your co-hosts of the Government Coins podcast. Hamza.
And I am Hamza Sabri, one of the other great co-hosts to Government Coins, the podcast, and CEO, founder of Global Connects. Thank you, Matt, for giving me some game and information on how to enter into contracting with the agency. And I hope that the viewers were paying attention to the key thing to responding back to the RFI. I was just doing a live last night, just talking about requests for information, responding back to those, and that allows you to be able to get opportunities sole sourced to you based out of that by bypassing the traditional bidding process. So we get more into we're doing business with the government, not bidding. And that's where you're presenting value, you're presenting your capability and showing your competency, because that's the most important part when doing business with these different government agencies. I appreciate it again. It was a lot of gems that you dropped, and I took a lot of notes.
Yes, I have a ton of links that Matt has shared as well, and I'm going to drop them on the YouTube chat. So if you are listening to this on, Apple, Spotify, make sure you go and check out the YouTube link, because we drop all the YouTube page, because we drop all of the links into the chat. And Matt, how can business owners connect with you or your team?
So you can reach out to me and my team. There's just 3 of us. It goes directly to our inbox. But if you email us at industryliaison@usaid.gov, it'll come directly to my team, and we'd be happy to connect with you as well. So thank you all for inviting me on to Joy. And I know, like I said, there are a lot of links. We as an agency, just generally speaking, try and be as open and transparent and put everything we have out there for space. And so there are a host of resources available on our website and other stuff. I think And so really happy to help connect with you, help connect you to the agency. So thank you all again for this discussion today. We really appreciate it. And I do want to give a plug. We do have a new OSDBU director. She just joined a couple of weeks ago. She's awesome. I know she would love to be on here to talk to you as well. And additional outreach efforts we can do to small business office. So
Matt, that would be great. I actually just saw that, Kimberly Bale. So I will be reaching out to you to see about getting her on for our upcoming season. So that'll be pretty cool. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who is listening or watching this and listening on any of the podcasting mediums. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Make sure you share this with your community as well. And those are my last words. Chrisley, Hamza, you have last words?
Small steps towards the big goal every day. It's nothing has changed. And that's the key thing into entering government contract. This is not something that happens overnight, or this is a get rich quick scheme. This is a process. And when you understand these policies and procedures and blueprints, you just wash, rinse, repeat. And Matt gave us a clear blueprint to enter into doing business with the agency. So once again, it's just taking the small steps towards that big goal every day.
And on that note, have a great week, everyone, and see you guys next week.
Yes, yes. I am, yeah.